I don't want to just send you the purchase sale agreement on this particular transaction we looked at because sorry. One is probably privileged and it doesn't need to get out, but what I did want to do was at least go over, have you guys gone through a purchase sale agreement in your law class? Or no?
Yeah,
a little bit?
A little bit, yeah.
You've gone through a Form 1?
Yeah.
Okay.
One, yeah.
So what I'm going to do is, and I'll just blow through it, because then I feel comfortable that, you're getting some of the material. I was just afraid that, maybe you weren't, covering some of that. But I thought it was just sort of a nice sort of close to this particular transaction. So, purchase sale agreement after the bid's been accepted, before the closing, okay? That's the sort of timing on it. A bunch of different components to a purchase agreement. I'm just going to sort of blow through those. There's typically a description of the land that's laid out somewhere, okay? So you're buying or you're given rights and interests in that subject property, which is usually detailed. There's a description of the purchase price, and there's a discussion about earnest money. You guys talked about earnest money, down payments, escrow payments, any other way that it's used. So, how does earnest money work in a transaction? Is it refundable or not?
Escrow? It's not refundable.
Depends.
Depends on the structure of the arrangement.
Yeah.
Escrow?
Earnest money. Escrow is a fund in which earnest money could be held. So escrow is an account that's held by somebody on behalf of somebody else. So people call it escrow funds, but it's earnest money or deposit. So the answer is deposits may or may not be refundable depending on the arrangement that you have. What's typical in real estate is that you would put a fully refundable deposit up until a particular point in time in a transaction.
It goes hard.
What people refer to going hard, subsequent to a particular time lapse or event, the money typically is not refundable. You go hard, it becomes non-refundable, etc. So, to answer your question, or to answer the question appropriately, earnest money is typically refundable prior to a particular date and not refundable typically after a particular date. Okay? Title insurance. So, in this particular transaction, the purchaser, at their sole cost and expense, acquired title. I can tell you there's been at times, as an enticement, since you already as a seller have a title policy in place, you pay for an endorsement to that policy, and you're just basically doing a favor to the buyer. Instead of him having to buy a whole new policy, he gets an endorsement. It's usually cheaper, okay? Survey. A seller typically delivers a survey. Why? Because that survey typically is going to have all the conditions on the site. Okay, so a buyer may want to do a survey to validate it or update it or get a report from the surveyor who's done it, but typically a seller would provide a survey. You typically have inspection periods and rights. Contracts, in general, are typically subject to confidentiality provisions. You can't go around telling people, hey, I have this building under contract. Hey, I have this site under contract. Hey, I have an option on this. Typically, sellers would ask you to retain confidentiality, okay? And not only on the deal, but on the information that they give you. Because if the transaction ultimately doesn't close, the person who's going to be at risk is the seller. Okay, so the seller is typically going to require a buyer to maintain full confidentiality here. What are purchasers' responsibilities? Typically to not interfere with what's happening in the building. So they're typically going to be given rights to do things, conduct their diligence, right? Inspections, talk to people, obtain financing. As long as they don't get in the way. And to the extent that they do get in the way or damage the seller, they're typically going to indemnify the seller. Yes, sir?
Was it this particular property? It wasn't a bid, was it?
This was on the market. I know this property was on the market. I don't know I don't know how it was adjudicated. So I don't know if it was sort of an open listing out there, and, you know, there was a haphazard process, or there was, my sense is, I think there was a bid here that these guys prevailed on.
When you say haphazard, what are you referring to?
That there wasn't like a call for bids, you know, it was on the market, and these guys identified it, made an offer, and it was accepted. As opposed to, here's a window, sign a confidentiality agreement, get access to the data room, you're gonna get an invitation to bid on so-and-so date, at so-and-so time. Okay? I think it was a bid, because I think CBRE was marketing this, pretty sure.
So in that case then, I guess on the contract, was there an inspection period, or was that already provided?
That really had been provided in advance. In this particular contract, they had some additional periods to do some additional work. I don't know the particulars, 'cause I didn't do this transaction. I think what happened is because they'd identified there were some issues with the roof and some of the mechanical systems, I think they asked for some additional time to assess it,
Okay.
and they were given that. That's not typical. Typical, once your period to inspect is gone,
Yeah.
it's done, okay?
And one more question first.
Yeah.
So, you don't have the opportunity to do like tenant interviews on a bidding situation. So, for example, on this one, American Airlines, their lease was expiring in 2014. So, as a bidder bidding, not having the, I don't know if then the seller would put that forward and say the chances are 90% that they're gonna renew,
Yeah, so-
or we're uncertain at this time, or?
So that might be one of the things that you're actually allowed to do, sort of, you know, post-contract. This particular contract, they had X number of days before the money went hard, where they could do some inspections and talk to some tenants, okay? That's one way you can structure it. When you're dealing with credit tenancy, typically it's sort of, you know, you've got your period to evaluate, you've got your ability to talk to property management and assess what their interpretation of what tenants are saying. And you can ask during a period if you have the ability to speak with a tenant, but you may not be given that. That may be a risk that you need to assume on risk of renewals, et cetera. And the problem is when it's a seller's market and there's a bunch of people bidding, they're just gonna say, hey, take your risk. And somebody's willing to take the risk that, you know, they can underwrite a 75% renewal probability. That's why the most opportune time to sell a building is not when a big lease is coming up. The most opportune time is when you've got a stabilized cash flow. That typically provides less upside for a buyer, right? So core assets tend to have less variability or risk involved with future cash flows, less lease renewals. Value plus assets tend to have these big gaps out there. You're going to get a bigger return, but guess what? There's more risk associated with it. Typically, you can terminate a contract up until a particular date. Then you get into, I'm not an attorney, you get into issues, and this particular contract talks about it later on, whether you can do specific performance or not. Can you force the other party to go through with their obligations under a contract, right? That may or may not work in a lot of cases. You may have the contractual right to do it. Sometimes what's typical in real estate is what's going to happen is if somebody terminates or defaults on their contract, typically they're going to default on whatever deposit, you know, they've put, especially a buyer. Can't sort of force a buyer to buy a building. If he's walking away, he probably doesn't have the ability to be forced. The seller side's a little bit easier in the sense that you could probably, if they'll negotiate it, force them into specific performance. That, you know, once you've locked it up, you spent all this money, they can't weasel out because they got a bigger offer or a better offer from somebody else. Okay, all negotiated. The contracts talk about the closings. What are the conditions? What does the buyer need to deliver? What does the seller need to deliver? What kind of contracts? Detail the cash that's due, the type of title policy, the type of endorsement, plans that you may have, keys. You know, just think about, like, thinking a house, just a bigger house, you know? All the keys to the house, all the drawings, all the plans, all the warranty information on equipment that you have, all the contracts, everything.
Question.
Yes,
For
ma'am.
a situation like this, would it be okay for you to request a new set of drawings? If they already have existing drawings, can I request new drawings? Because what happens is, I've seen them, and what happens is, over a period of time, from constant using drawings for different things, they get kind of ratty and they get kind of old. Is it fair to ask for a new set? And who pays for that?
I'll talk to as-bills later on. I don't think you're typically gonna get anything other than what's there from a seller. If you want to invest the time and the money to get as-built, you could probably do it. You may not have the time to do it during a diligence period. And so, you typically need to go with what's there. The more institutional grade an asset, the better the plans are gonna be. Prorations. So in this particular case, this contract says, the following shall be prorated with respect to the property as of 12:01 Eastern Time on the day of closing, as if the purchaser were vested with title to the property during the entire day upon the closing. So in this particular contract, as in the example that I did with the closed settlement statement that we did for the last session, custom in South Florida would have it that the buyer takes the day of closing. Okay? So the assumption would be the buyer takes the day of closing with all its income and with all its expenses. Okay? So the contracts typically talk about, all the operating expenses and all the income that was earned or incurred or accrued up to a particular date belong to the seller. Everything to the future goes to the buyer. Security deposits held on behalf of tenants go from the seller, excuse me, credited to the buyer. Property taxes. Sometimes you see in contracts, you didn't see that here. You can build in some holdback or some escrow funds at the time of closing that a seller would not be entitled to at the time of closing, and that a buyer could claw back into to guarantee, certain representations that were made. You don't typically see that in real estate. You see that in more operating businesses, okay? In real estate, it's kind of like, I'm not making representations, you've had your period, do it. But it is possible that, there's some unforeseen contingency that some money gets set aside in escrow, and that a buyer has a right to claw back during a particular, point in time.
This thing on the, that you sent on from the attorney, it had a thing there when it came to environmental issues that might come up.
That might be something where there's something pending, and you might, just to get the deal closed, set X amount of, funds aside to make sure that the seller performs whatever, or, is responsible financially for whatever it is that they represented or agreed to be held responsible for. Typically, those reserves burn off after a particular point in time. So you got to make sure that time is of essence. You got to make sure you claw back on that when it's still possible. Typically, here, closing costs. Seller pays their cost, buyer pays their cost, okay? Representations of the seller. Basically, the seller is just, they're going to do as minimum as they can. They're typically going to say we're legally constituted, or we have all the rights, of an owner, and we have the rights to convey this property to you. That's where they're going to stop. Here you got, to the best of our knowledge, there are no legal actions. Nobody ever wants to sign that. Institutional guys will never sign that. But that's about as much as you're going to get from somebody. To the best of our knowledge, there's no legal actions, no suits, nothing that we haven't represented to you. Okay? Purchaser typically warranties or represents the same thing. Okay? We're legally constituted, we have the authority to enter into this transaction. Okay? The seller will covenant a bunch of things. We're going to continue to manage the property in the same, shape and fashion and manner that we've continued to do it all the way through closing, right? We're not going to enter into any transactions, of material or beyond a certain scope. We're not going to enter into any leases beyond a certain dollar amount. We're not going to enter into any contracts beyond a certain, and either you're going to get the buy-in and the approval of the buyer, or typically what you're gonna do is set a dollar threshold. What you're typically gonna do is say, other than what is in the ordinary course of business. And any good guys aren't gonna put a, they're not gonna handicap a buyer during that sort of contract period, okay? Any notices that come, we're gonna relay to you, et cetera. We're gonna make sure we insure the building, right, during that period. We're not gonna take any property out of here. What you see is what you get kind of thing. The purchasers in this particular contract, the purchaser's sole remedy as a result of any new information that comes up, is they can have their earnest money fully refunded. That's what they agreed to here. The seller basically said, listen, if something comes up during this period that you think is adverse and you don't want to go forward with it, all we're willing to do is refund your money. We're not going to be forced into selling the building to you at a discount or whatever. There's no adjustments to the price, basically, is what they're saying. So risk of commissions, you represent, who's representing who, notices, you have to give notices to so-and-so person, typically with copy to so-and-so attorney. Yes, sir.
Just to go back a quick second, you said that their sole remedy was just to get their earnest money back, and they wouldn't probably negotiate the price. So I remember there were some things that needed to get fixed with the building.
In this particular contract, they actually, and I skipped over that, they made some concessions for that. So there was a purchase price, and there were some specific concessions that the owner said, we will give a credit, of X amount, of up to X amount.
Okay, but beyond that, there's no more.
No, typically, and again, you could force specific performance on somebody, so hey, all of a sudden I uncovered, let's go through an example. I represent to you that the roof is brand new and is free of all defects. You never get a seller to do that, but let's say that he says that.
Mm-hmm.
You do an inspection, and the roof needs replacement, right? You may have a clause in there that forces the seller to perform on that representation. Again, I don't think you'd see that in a real estate contract. You may see it in again, traditional, M&A deal, but not real estate. Okay?
Let me ask you this, so with those concessions, so is it more customary to say, hey, here, because they knew of these things before they entered into the purchase agreement, right? So is it more customary to say, okay, well, here's the purchase price and these are the concessions I want, or we've considered, all of these things that need to be repaired, and based on what the cost we might incur, here's the purchase price. Which is more customary?
Well, what's more customary is that dialogue is had during the bid process. And what's more customary is that there is no concession in a contract that's already built into the price based on the discussions. So typically, by the time that a contract is signed, there's already been a negotiation process that says, hey, we identified so much, and we're willing to take so much of a haircut. So yeah, you can claim whatever, here's the price. You don't want it? Okay, next guy. You don't want it? Next guy. Okay?
And, question.
Yes.
On the M&A deals, like, for example, like when Office Depot bought Office Max, how is all that property handled? Is it like a closing on each property, and then, I guess, prorated portion or whatever?
Well,
or does it just stay in Office Max?
well, I mean, look, those are transactions of totally different scales. First of all, a lot of the transactions a lot of the storefronts of all those two businesses you mentioned are leaseholds, not freeholds. So there's an assignment of a lease interest. Okay? To the extent that there's real estate, typically what's happening is Company A is acquiring the shares of Company B. And this entity, so Office Depot owns a bunch of subsidiaries, including a bunch of subsidiaries that just have real estate, to say something, okay? They create OM Acquisition Corp., right? Which bids for 100% of the shares of Office Max, which has a bunch of subsidiaries, right? So this entity winds up acquiring all the shares of that, such that this whole umbrella now goes under there. You haven't done any transactions at the store level. You've done a corporate level transaction.
So you acquire all interests and privileges that relate to.
Well, you're buying the stock of a business, and again, that's that's one of the key issues or component in real estate is that you typically buy an asset as opposed to buying an entity that owns an asset. The minute you buy an entity, you're assuming all of the risks associated with that entity and all the baggage. So, you know, the rule of thumb is a seller's always going to want to sell his entity as opposed to the assets. And a buyer's only going to want to buy the assets, not the entity. In real estate, you typically want to buy the assets, not the entity that owns the assets. But you're buying an entity. You're not, you know, buying a bunch of stores. And you may have a bunch of contracts for property rights and intellectual property, but ultimately, what you've done is acquire the shares of that business. All these contracts, I mean, I'm not an attorney, counterparts, you know, anything that's been signed is like a copy of another. Severability, if one clause of the agreement is null and void, that doesn't necessarily invalidate the entire agreement. There are no third-party, you know, beneficiaries here. Now, what is here? Assignment. You typically can't assign contracts in real estate. Now, what happens a lot is sellers will allow buyers to assign a contract to an affiliated entity. So, during the process of the acquisition, the buyer creates a different structure that they want to acquire the asset through. You could typically assign a contract. What you can't do is flip the contract. Okay? That's typical.
I thought Jesse said you could, though. Was that Jesse?
If it's allowed. In the
Well,
contract.
I don't know if Jesse said that, number one. That's what I was thinking first. I don't recall that. He
Yeah, I
may,
asked the question.
but what was it in the context of?
I think he was talking about a situation where the guy didn't own the property, he was trying to shop the contract.
Okay, this is one of his diligence examples.
Yes.
So, there was a diligence example in which a contract was assignable. So, I'm not saying that by operation of law, contracts aren't assignable. I'm telling you that by business practice, most real estate contracts are not going to be assignable. Because a seller's not going to put himself into a position to sell an asset to then let somebody else shop it and make a profit on it. You understand what I'm saying?
I totally understand.
Exhibits, you know, legal descriptions, the form of the deed that's going to be delivered.
How many pages is
Pretty big.
And they can be pretty big. Bills of sales and assignments for all the assets that are there. All the leases are typically assigned. All the intellectual property rights are assigned. Trademarks, names, you know, this is the Southeast Financial Center, you know. Contracts that are assigned and assumed. So you've got assignment agreements and you've got assumption agreements. Rent rolls are typically attached.
You have to highlight the strikeouts. I just saw a couple of initial, like you have to say this clearly has to go and strike it out and initial it like this.
Well, typically, if what typically is going to happen, it's going to go back and forth with attorneys so many times. Signed copies shouldn't have stuff that's. If you strike stuff out, you typically need to have both guys sit, you know, strike it, initial that, and initial a page. But you typically would replace the page. I've never seen this one, but closing memorandum and indemnification agreement, you know. So, you know, in this particular case, he kind of agreed to this agreement that outlined what the closing statement was gonna have in it. Tenant notification letter, this the type of letter we're gonna send to the tenants about the assignment, you know, blah, blah. So there's all kinds of junk involved with this stuff, okay? Schedule of due diligence documents. The seller is representing what they've given the buyer here. So they're not representing anything regarding the information that's there. They're representing, and the buyer is acknowledging that they've received those documents. That's probably as much as you're gonna see in a real estate transaction. And again, the reason that that's done is, what you want to assure in a court of law, if there's ever a dispute, is that the seller didn't withhold information. You know, he made all reasonable information known, and a seller is going to want to say, hey, they were given that. As prudent buyers, they should have examined all of that. So that's kind of why they say, this is what we gave you. More importantly, they want the buyer to acknowledge that that's what they received. Alex, Dustin, and Mark, you guys are the finalists for the building. And as we go through the next couple of slides, start thinking about what your best and final offer is going to be, and then we'll take it from there after a while, okay?
I think there was something missing from my bid.
What was the final price, what was the numbers on that? Can you go over those or not? The
Excuse me?
numbers on their contract,
On whose contract?
on that one?
The other people?
Yeah, you said, what they offer, like 23, and then they.
You think I'm an unscrupulous broker?
That sounds unethical, Dustin.
What are you from Miami? Is that how you do business?
Classroom,
That sounds unethical.
No, congratulations.
oh, we're not going against those guys, I'm just wondering what was the final outcome for them?
Congratulations, your bid has been considered as one of the potentially, you know, prevailing or, you know, winning ones. And so, get with the program, think how much you really want to buy. You want me to tell you what everybody else?
On camera?
You were the lowest bidder. That's all I can tell you. If you really want to buy this,
Get your money.
And that's all you're ever gonna hear. You were the lowest bidder.
get it up, get it higher.
I never heard to ask.
You can ask. I'm gonna go through a couple of things relatively quickly here.
Where's my performer here?
So even though I was like close to the lowest bidder, they wouldn't call me and be like, because technically my money is ready.
Mr. Saunders, not only were you practically close to the lowest bidder, you were the lowest bidder.
Wait, there was like $216,000 bid. I seen
I would
that.
assume that that was an error, okay? Because it was very close to somebody else's exact bid, which would be a multiple, a CapEx. So you were by far the lowest bid, and it just led me to believe that you probably couldn't bring it up high enough to
To
really.
get my IRR that I wanted.
Well, I think you're gonna have to purchase.
30%?
You're gonna have to purchase somebody else's building because.
With that kind of
But
bid.
it was a good try. It was a good try. You know, I could blow this up a lot, but I sent you guys this. This is just a different. It actually is a PDF form, so you can actually use this form in your due diligence assignments. This is from a company called Partner, and they specialize in doing due diligence for the institutional real estate industry. So if you need, you know, somebody to do diligence for you on a portfolio of assets in Indianapolis and Chicago or whatever, this is the kind of firm that you could call. They'll do environmental, they'll do property inspections, okay? But the way they broke it down, so I sent you mine, I sent you Nachi's, I sent you this one. You know, they've got a property section, right, which they talk about site plans and zoning, environmental plans, COs, licenses, permits, warranties, compliance with ADA, what's, you know, preventative maintenance program on the mechanical systems there, engineering reports that they may do. They've highlighted in blue the things that they'll do for you. So, as you can see, theirs are much more asset specific. But curiously, they will do zoning reports for you as well. I mean, a lot of times you'll go to an attorney for that, but the fewer people you got to talk to, the better off you're going to be. Did I Guys, the three guys on the bid are on like something, that's okay, I'm good with that. You guys are like, they got smoke coming out of their ears, they wanna win. Okay, they got a whole other area which is much more owner, buyer focused than third party, okay? Take a look at leases, abstract them, do a credit analysis, review tenant files, communication, correspondence with tenants. Take a look at the deposits, reconcile them with estoppels coming in, any letters of credits that maybe tenants have issued or offered in lieu of security deposits, commission agreements that may be in place. A lot of times you're walking in, not only the leases, but brokers have commissions on renewals. That's pretty typical in the first 10 years. If there's a renewal, that a broker would get a reduced commission on that. Review of the rent roll, any parking or any off-site agreement that's and history on tenants. So tenancy, that's the way they break it up. Maybe there's a way that you like it better. Maybe there's a way that you can refer. The goal of all this at the end is you take the things I've given you and your own experience and you build your own checklist for whatever project you're working on. Financial information. So, you know, typically, you know, that's just basically operating history. So take a look at financial statements, take a look at tax returns, take a look at utility statements, take a look at CapEx, take a look at collections, take a look at utilities. Okay, so going back to, I'll jump in and say it now. One of the gaps that I saw in the submissions that we had this week was there was a lot of emulation going on. So in one area there was a detail, people had details of operating expenses. You know, the question is are those the right operating expenses going forward? You know, what's the substantiation of that? How are we validating those? So they weren't there like to just fill and generate paper, right? But ultimately what this review is saying, what's my operating expense structure going to look like going forward? Agreements, any employees that may be, again, try not to hire employees at the property level. Your goal should always be to have the management company have the employees. You change management companies, what's typical is the new management company, if you want to keep the employees, and if they've been good employees, you typically will just, one management company gets rid of them, and a new management company coming in will hire them, okay? So you typically at the property level don't want to have employees. You don't want to have anything other than a real estate asset, okay? So you don't want contracts. You want the management company to enter into the contracts on your behalf, You want them to enter into the contracts for the benefit of the building. Leasing agreements, and there's a whole legal, you know, title, survey, deeds, you know, blah, 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 easements, restrictions. It's sort of a grab bag of miscellaneous things. Building measurement, that's what we've heard several times in this particular term that might be of interest. There might be some revenue there. Sprinkler, I don't know where you all wound up, but one of the things we talked about in the project you guys were doing for DTC or DCT was when you get beyond a certain height, you got to start sprinklering the racking systems, you know. So a friend of mine just bought a place up in Val Harbor, and I told him he was going to spend a lot more money than he thought. He thought, oh, I'm going to rehab it for $100,000. Yeah, I go, multiply it by 2 or 3. Yeah. Then his wife came down. It went double. Then he hired the architect, and then it went up another $100,000. Okay, so, and one of the things was, and it never even occurred to me because I live in a single family, but it's multifamily, but it's single unit. They're townhouses. He lives in a building. The architect didn't draw in fire sprinklers. So all of a sudden, start doing work. The inspector gets there. Where are the sprinklers? So sprinklers, big issue. Okay. And then these are, you know, again, they call it site visits, but, you know, the whole property and structural environmental review that these people could do. Appraisal, I purposely have not shown you, and will not show you the appraisal on this property. Because I did have one, but I want to send it out. I'm going to send the appraisal out to you guys before you value the property. Why would I do that, you know?
You gonna tell us?
Well, it doesn't matter, because the appraisals, the guy that runs, I should say, he's actually a very nice guy. The guy that runs the CBRE office, the appraisal office, in actually the whole state of Florida, is one of our senior appraisers nationally, is a guy named Jim Agner. And Jim did this appraisal, but behind his name it says MAI, which stands for?
Master Appraisal Institute.
Made as instructed.
Oh, really?
No, I didn't say that. No, listen.
Made as instructed.
You guide your appraiser. You guide your appraiser. You guide your appraiser. Okay? So, hey, just another tool. Now I'm going to show you another one, and this comes from, so same company partner with Globe Street. I pulled this off the Globe Street website some months ago when I was preparing to do this class, and so they did a primer. So this was like, I've cut out 20-something slides from like what was 100-some-odd slide presentation, and it was just to touch on some of the things that we've talked about or that we haven't spoken about in this class, so at least you get some awareness. Okay, but ultimately, this whole thing was about a year ago. There was, developments coming back, development. So again, what you're going to see here are probably things I haven't touched on so much, but with mitigating risk. We talked about that. We're not going to eliminate risk. Let's mitigate it. Let's reduce it. Let's limit it. Okay? So this is who they are. Give them a plug. They put this together. So. Okay? You don't want to get knocked out. You can get knocked down. You don't want to get knocked out. Okay? You don't want to blow it. You don't want to close on that. Can't get the rights you think you were going to get, and now you can't afford to build on it because the numbers don't work. So you want to mitigate risk. What you definitely want to do is you want to avoid the knockout. The further up front, you stop to think of the chain of events. The further up front you identify an issue, the less the costs, the lower the costs you're going to incur along the way. So you realize you can't build what you want on it, you don't even bother bidding on it. You stop your diligence process, Okay. So, zoning. What's my land zone for? Do the numbers make sense? Right? Let's do an overall, talking development here. I'm not looking at cash flow. Let's do a back of the envelope underwriting here. Hey, I'm going to do 4 million square feet of industrial here. Let me build a prototype 200,000 square foot box. Let me put 20 of those boxes. Let me stagger them over 6 years. And let me do a quick and dirty Excel model here. What does it look like? Does this have a leg to stand on, right? Geotechnical. Can I build on this? One of the things we talked about is, Nachi was talking about formal and informal landfills in Florida. So, what I got under the soil. Probably single biggest cost overrun I've seen when I was in the development business was site conditions. You get somewhere, people start excavating, that's your business. We didn't expect to see that under the ground, And it's time, and time is money, okay? Traffic studies, we talked about that. Environmental, surveys, utility, impact fees. Going back to the DRI, the impacts. What are you going to do on roads? What are you doing to fire? What are you doing to water? What are you doing to fire? What are you doing to police? Libraries, etc. Permits that you need and the cost of the permits. I got involved the other day in I'm the head of the finance council in my church, and I got to mass the other day, and there was like one of these portable air conditioning units pumping air into the church. What's up with that? I mean, air conditioner breaks, you fix it. So I was kind of pissed at the pastor as it was for some other stuff, but it all,
What?
Yeah, camera.
I don't care, I was pissed at him, I mean, I was pissed at him.
You
Like,
never get pissed at the pastor.
why not? He's human, he's human. I mean, he's good, he's a good guy, I like him,
I saw
but he can do, you know, stupid things too, you know? So, it all coincided, we had a quarterly finance committee meeting, and this air conditioning was one of the issues that got my blood going, because it'd been 3 weeks, and he calls the archdiocese to have a guy comes from the real estate department, who then sends another guy from, you know, their mechanical, dude, just fix the damn thing, you know? So, turned out a guy was coming after the the finance committee meeting. I said, look, we'll get this fixed today. So I went up on the roof with the contractor they brought. Okay, we need 2 new compressors. Okay, no problem. How long does it take? Just give me a check. We'll have them here tomorrow. Okay, so the guy from the archdiocese says, well, send me the permit application. What?
Get it done.
This building's 60 years old.
Yeah.
And the guy says, well, you've got like your smoke alarms. What? Anyway, I don't think he knows we fixed it already. The next day, the damn portable unit was gone, new compressors. The guy's like, look, if we show up here at 4:30, we know when the building inspector leaves in the city. We've done this here before. They plop down too. But I did go to the village website, and to put down 2 15-ton compressors, it's like $1,200 in fees. $1,200.
Did you go to confession?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Is that a sin?
It is.
Yeah.
You
I'm
have to
sorry,
respect
God.
the laws of the land. That's in the Bible.
They do have a hotline you can call in for work with them.
I wish I had this still. There was
Favors from.
I had a video. There was
Look,
from
you've
it was
got
from
Mark
a-
leaving the class.
Yeah, it was,
He doesn't even want to be a part of this anymore.
it was a stand-up comedy. It was a comedy show in Spain, and it was confession by internet. And so it was.
Yeah,
It was, and there was some nuns in the background. So like the ones running the service to make money with some nuns, and so people would like write in, you know, I did this or whatever. They're like, you know, you gotta whip yourself. You know, it was just hilarious. It was just hilarious. So anyway, okay, zoning. So we know you guys have talked, you know, the difference between zoning and okay, here we go, overlays. Concerns, agricultural lands. There was an article in Florida Trend this week that talked about the disappearance of our agricultural land in the state of Florida. And how, you know, people retiring, families that want to stay in the business, developers. There's been, I forget the number of acres, but several million acres in Florida that have been retired from agricultural service, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can get their land use changed. So that's a great opportunity, but a big challenge depending. Go to Martin County, you'll never build there. Tremendous number of land parcels for sale. You'll never get agricultural land converted, at least with the administration that's been there.
What you could try to do is buy the development rights.
You may not have the right to develop in agricultural land. You can't buy rights to something that's not permitted. It's not a permitted use. All you can do is a general use. In Dane County, agricultural lands are under general use. But general uses don't allow you to have X density or X particular uses. It allows you to have cows and crops and things like that. So natural habitats, we talked about the eagle and all that kind of stuff. Airports and the impacts that those have. Topography. I'm not an expert with this, but obviously in certain parts of the country, the floodplain is all important because, you know, where does water run when it rains?
Down.
Yeah, and we don't have a lot of, you know, we don't have hills, so we're not used to rivers overflowing here. But, you know, go to Mississippi, go to Missouri, you know, go to Ohio. You know, even Minnesota, and you see it starts raining or snow melts, and you gotta know where your property lies within the floodplain. Historical buildings, that's another one. 3529 St. Gaudens Road in Coconut Grove. I saw it in the paper, I actually drove in front of it. A house that was built 100 years ago in Coconut Grove. Guy buys it for $1.5 million. Now he wants to knock it down and make 2 parcels out of it. The neighbors all pissed. And I never liked this stuff. I saw the house, I thought, God, for $1.5 million, I'd buy it and redo it, you know? There's some beautiful homes there. And so how are the neighbors trying to get the house protected? They're trying to get the Historic Preservation Board of the City of Miami to designate it as a historical site. Can't impact historical sites. Things that are of concern. Density. How many units can you put in a particular area? How many square feet can you build? Setbacks. How far back from your neighbor? I mean, I'm sure you've covered most of this stuff in other classes, but stuff to consider during a diligence process. How much parking do I need to provide? And that's a twofold question. What does code require me to provide? What does the market require me to provide? And if you want to make it a third-fold question, what are the specific tenants that I'm trying to target going to require? So I may be in a suburban office environment where some guys provide 4-to-1 parking, or better yet, I got a better example. The market provides 5 per 1,000 parking. Code only requires 4 per 1, but you want to put in a call center where you got, 100 people and 1,000 square feet, You need 10-to-1 parking. So you need to understand that. Height restrictions, open space requirements, coverage, how much are they going to let you build? So all these things impact coverage, okay? But there may just be specific requirements over and above that. Landscaping, what do you have to put? What can you take out? It's curious to me, I don't know anything about it, I'm not a tree hugger, I don't know any of this stuff. There's a tree called the Melaleuca. You know what that is? So the Melaleuca is looks like a paper, like a papyrus thing. It's like the, what's the tree they have in Australia? The, it'll come, whatever, the Melaleuca. No.
Eucalyptus.
Like the eucalyptus. And the Australian pine. You know what the Australian pines look like? Those two are prevalent here in South Florida. Neither is native. The Melaleuca was brought here to desiccate the Everglades. That was brought in to plant, to suck out the water out of the Everglades. And the Australian pine, I don't know how it came, but it has no root structure. So anytime the wind blows, it knocks them over. And they grow very fast and very quickly. So it's a hazard here. But you can't remove either of those without getting in trouble, because they're protected, even though they're not native species. So you got to be careful with landscaping as well. So I'm talking about geotechnical studies, capacity, soil makeup and quality. Where's the water table? Okay? We talked about that the other day. I did diligence on a site, and we talked about doing a structural mat. When we got to the development program, our construction guys were saying, no, you got to drive piles into the ground and you got to build on piles. Totally different cost structure, So one is compacting and then putting a mat. The other one, going out and putting 20-foot piles is pretty expensive. Okay? You buy landfills. So people are reclaiming a lot of land now. What do you have to do on a landfill? If it's organic, a lot of times now, you cap it, right? If it's organic, you probably can't ever do anything on it. If it's inorganic, if it's C&D material, you can probably cap it and put a lot of different uses on it, but it may not have the structural integrity to do it without pilings, without dynamic compaction, etc.
Sam, we go.
Yes, sir.
What's C&D material?
Construction and demolition debris.
Oh.
We talked about this. What's the impact on traffic and on roads? Parking as well, okay? Entrances into and out of areas. we talked about environmental quite a bit, wetlands we've talked about, survey issues, as-built. So, if there's nothing, you gotta do one. You should do one. Because you gotta know what there is on site. You gotta know the conditions. If there is one, you probably should consider updating it.
Who pays for that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't wanna say surveyors aren't expensive, but it's not a significant cost of a transaction, so my sense is gonna be the buyer's gonna do it. I would do it if I were buying. I'd find out who last surveyed the property for the seller, and I'd engage them to update it. That's the easiest thing to do. Yeah, I don't wanna say surveyors are like an annuity, but those are businesses that sort of tend to stay there, and it's kind of like a State Farm office almost, you know? Except the State Farm office, you don't keep the clients, but, you know, you're a surveyor, you keep all these records, you're gonna be there forever. Sell the office, client stays there. So, you know, what's in a survey? You guys have, you know, looked at all that. Monuments, flood zone, relief, zoning, dimensions, exterior building dimensions, parking spaces, utilities, requirements, adjoining owners, earthwork, landfill, wetlands, okay? Again, that's not for this class. Utility. Is it available? And that's what, when you go to remote areas, you go to places like Naples and stuff, I'm sorry, when you go to Jamaica, no,
Whoa.
listen, you go to Jamaica and you want to build a new hotel complex somewhere, and it's likely that a local municipality is going to say to you, how are you going to deal with water? How are you going to deal with waste? How are you going to deal with electricity potentially, okay? And because we don't have capacity for that, so pay me to build additional capacity, or you build additional capacity, or you figure out how you're going to get it. Okay? Now, that is coming into the site and what you're speccing for the site. Okay, so you have to have some vision as to the use that you're going to have on the site. Okay, so I got so much power coming in. Is that enough to distribute to what I have here? I have so much water coming in. Is that enough to distribute for the uses that I have here? Well, I don't have it. What's it take to get there? Yeah. I told you those. In addition to the site, the moratorium countywide that I talked about, water and sewer in Dade County about 15 years ago, Professor Maxwell was involved in a site in the Grove about a year ago where there was a just community-specific water and sewer moratorium. You couldn't do anything because a particular part of the grid just didn't have capacity. And they'll stop you, okay? Phone and cable. It's funny, one of these guys I know in Key Biscayne was complaining the other day. Some guy was doing work in their condo and they planted a tree in the backyard and cut power to I don't know how many other residences. So, identifying underground utilities. Impact fees, I mean, you know. Yeah. I didn't mention the Army Corps of Engineers. When you've got any navigable body of water or any wetlands, whether it's navigable or not, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers gets involved, okay? So, over the local, state, and federal environmental agency, wetlands have the additional Army Corps of Engineer supervision. Adaptive reuses here. This is, you know, asbestos, piping, ducts, window, floor tiles, fireproofing, ADA requirements, handicap access, bathrooms, fire alarms, corridor width. Okay? avoid, you know, fatal flaws, and that's it. Okay? So, you guys have had multiple speakers. We walked through a case. I've given you checklists. I've walked through checklists. I've given you articles. You should have a pretty good sense at this point, after walking out of this class, of how to get your hands around an acquisition. Okay? We focused more on an existing asset, but I think today we've brought up a little bit more what a development site would require. Okay? Any questions on that? Any questions? Guys are good to go? Okay.
Do you have a group exercise today?
What kind of? What kind of?
The usual group exercise.
No, not that. No.
That face says it's going to be a lot more difficult.
No, it's going to be easy.
He's sick and he's alone.
So, the case studies, presentations. Tell you, for the most part, aesthetically pleasing. For the most part, aesthetically pleasing. In some cases, well thought out. In some cases, not as well thought out. In some cases, much more mechanical than anything else. Now, what I mean by mechanical was, okay, this guy sent us a sample memo. I'm just going to copy exactly what he did there. That gives you half the answer. The other half requires thinking. So, I mean, I was just telling one of the students earlier today, and it wasn't meant to be a trick. I sent a memo that was put together by a colleague after a meeting, off of one of my memos, after a meeting that several of us had regarding a specific property, in which a lot of the information that was in the memo had been discussed and presented. So in a lot of cases, there wasn't the link between what was there and a summary, because that had been discussed in person. So, for example, some of you endeavored to get market sales comps, but I didn't see how those market sales comps, other than putting them and cutting and pasting them on a sheet of paper, tied back to support why you were bidding a certain amount per square foot for that particular asset. For the most part, I didn't see that. I didn't see a specific link saying, I have found comps between 200 and 280 dollars a square foot, and I'm bidding 210. I'm bidding on the lower end of the comp scale. Reality is most people didn't identify whether the comps truly were comps. Most of you identified, and then let's talk about rental comps, same thing. When we talk about rent comps, I didn't see the link between, some of you, you know, it seems to me like somebody got CoStar and distributed, that's fine, I don't have a problem with that. But this is not really a Class A office building in Coral Gables. It's not on the main street, it's way off the main street. Doesn't really have credit tenants. You may want to argue that American Airlines is a credit tenant or not, but that's the only semi-credit tenant. This is
Standing.
There were 3 of them that were publicly traded.
Listen, it's a Class B office building. B plus if you want. It's a Class A location. It's a Class A location. It's a Class A submarket. It's not a Class A location. It's not a Class A building. When was the building built?
1986.
1986. Can a 30-year-old building really be Class A? If they're downtown and people continually spent money on CapEx, it can. In a submarket, no, probably not. Class B plus, you know. And so when you look at comps, you can't use Coral Gables Class A building comps. You can't compare 396 Alhambra, which was just built right? At a cost of $500 a square foot to a building it's on the market for 200, and say the $35 a square foot net that somebody's paying here is comparable to this. So the questions there is, what's the gap to bridge, right? What's the gap to bridge? Number one, what's the right submarket? Most of you got sub. What's the market? Dade County. What's the submarket? Coral Gables CBD. What class is it? Class B.
B.
So then you say, okay, what's the market rent? So you're using somebody's service, you're using Jones Lang LaSalle, you're using CoStar. What's the market rent? Don't tell me the market rent is 24 to 37. That's a range. It's not a number. I don't plug a range into Argus. I gotta plug a number. More important than that, I go back to the link. How does the number, that is in the Argus model fit into that market? Connect the dots for me. Connect the dots for me. Because ultimately, the purpose of this memo is to get somebody to approve your purchase, right? I'll show you, when we're done with the exercise today, the one Glenn put together for his bosses. Very informal structure, 3 owners, he reports to one of them, they're on the phone every day, 3-page, very informal memo, because they've had a lot of discussions already. But 30 pages is great backup. But you have one page where it has all this information on it that says, hey, the market rents are $24 and I've modeled 25 because this is a superior building. Okay? Or in place is 27 and market is 35, and that implicitly tells you that I've got a huge mark-to-market opportunity. The type of fund, I'm just trying to think a couple of things that came to mind while I was saying. The type of fund that bought this is a value-add fund, so that already, if I had to doubt whether this was not a Class A office building, the type return structure they're looking for, the type return structures that most of you were getting is not indicative of a core fund. And if it's a value plus fund, it's not buying a Class A building. It's not buying a Class A asset. By definition. Most of you in this room have taken the capital markets class, and we've gone through the distinction between core, value plus, and opportunity type funds and the type of assets that they acquire. Yes, sir?
But there's nothing that you could do to that building to make it a Class A building?
I don't think so.
Because
I don't think so. It's not.
other than
If you told me that building was same street on Ponce, but a block off Miracle Mile, maybe. Maybe you could do something. If you tell me it's on Ponce and Alhambra, maybe. Otherwise, no. You know where the downtown Coral Gables? If you want to go eat from this building to all the restaurants in the Gables, what do you have to do? Get in your car, or
take that free trolley.
You take the trolley now. Now they got a trolley to take you there, so that helps. It's not a Class A building. If you want to go stay at the Hyatt, how do you do it? Can't walk there.
Does that take someone, actually, knowing Coral Gables to be able to get that answer? Because, I don't know Coral Gables, so.
No, I understand, but, no, listen, and that's just one of the moral of the story here is know the market you're buying in, right? Mm-hmm. Ultimately, there are a lot of things that triangulate to you there. $200 a square foot in Florida for a 10-story office building ain't Class A. Forget the location. That's already telling you that ain't a Class A building. Look at the pictures. That ain't a Class A office building. Compare that with that B of A tower over here, or the Franklin Templeton building. Just look at it. Class A office buildings, there are very few of. There are very few of.
So what do you think the Douglas Center is? You think that's Class B too? I mean, it's kind of the same location as far as.
No,
it's on East
Douglas,
Street.
Douglas,
Right, going,
listen, I know that just transacted, that just sold.
yeah,
I don't know much about that asset. The only thing that I know is that there are some significant tenants there that are credit tenants. And so, I don't know how it's sold, I don't know how it's viewed. Location-wise, is it Class A? No, not at all. It's on 8th Street, man, come on.
yeah, so that corner,
I mean, you can walk through La Carreta, doesn't make it a Class A. It has some Class A features as an asset. It has some credit tenants, that enhances things. By the way, Class A, B, and C, those aren't hard and fixed rules. Those are general descriptive terms that we use to try to get our hands around where rents should be, where market comps should be, where cap rates should be. And you've got buildings that straddle. So the question, can you ever do something to make a building a Class A building? Probably not. You can probably make a Class B building a Class B plus. But you probably can't make a building that was a Class A building once that has fallen out of that into a Class A building. It's probably prohibitive to do. There's probably something else that's happened around.
You know, as part of this exercise, sort of like in the late stage of it, I finally got a hold of a broker down in Miami, and I mean, that was like some of the best information, just like talking to him, rather than looking at some of the reports, because they're so, some of them are so different and giving me such different numbers. But he was able to tell me, yeah, this is like what the cost of land might be, when I was looking at, what's the replacement cost, and a lot of like, really be able to say, yeah, rents are ranging between such and such, well, there's what TIs are at, and, if there are rent abatements, questions like that, he was able to just
Answer those things, yeah. No, and that's how you learn. I mean, that's part of the class is to learn, right? And so you pick up the phone, call somebody with local knowledge, and you've got more inputs now to work with. Leverage. Most of you took what I'm going to call a haphazard approach to putting leverage on the asset. So I'm telling you, it is a Class B building. Class B plus if you want. It is a value plus asset. What should the leverage be?
70/30.
I have it 70-30 here.
Maximize return.
I was at 65.
He was at 65. Alex?
I had intermediaries, so they'd go up to 80% if I could CMBS.
Other ideas? I had a bunch of 50%s. 50% is more of a core asset, low risk, low return. So if you can get 80%, the deal, this particular deal has a 79%, LTV on it. They went out and shopped an
Yeah.
In fact, that was part of the deal that I think, pretty sure that CB had kind of prearranged a mortgage up to a certain value at, 70, almost 80% through a conduit. So what you want is to maximize the leverage on a building like this and minimize your cash so that your IRR is higher. So for those of you who haven't done the investments class or the finance class, I understand. Those of you who have, it should sort of, it should hit home. It really should hit home. Interest rate should be at what? I heard one this morning,
4.5.
4.5, something like that. So if money's cheap, the more leverage you can pile on, the better, right?
But there's a certain threshold as far as what lenders will give you as far as like your debt service coverage ratio, right? I mean, what are
So
they looking
typically
for
on a
these
commercial
days?
loan, people are gonna take a look at LTV, and they're gonna take a look at debt coverage, debt service ratios. So they're gonna look at what's the skin in the game that the buyer has, and what's his ability to service the cash. So absolutely.
I mean, what are they looking for? What kind of ratio are they looking for?
Today,
Mm-hmm.
Alex, what do you say, 1.3? I don't know, you said you were calling people, 1.25, 1.3?
Yeah, 1, 2, 1, 3. It's the same.
As long as you have a little bit of room, there's a market out there for it, so. I couldn't figure out for the life of me. I'll give the first one. What do you think somebody's gonna say, Miss Reed,
Oh, Lord.
if you bid $22,372,808.82?
Okay. The reason I did it, because I
No,
was.
I didn't ask you why you did it. What do you think people are gonna say?
It's very specific.
Cheap.
No, I'm saying.
No,
Simple this
I
one.
thought
Why
about
don't you bid
rounding it
22?
off, but then
22?
I know you're very specific, and I'm like, if I'm gonna have continuity between the spreadsheet that I turned in and the amount that I'm bidding, it needs to be the same. I thought about rounding it off.
23,405,554. 21,733,586. 22, whatever. 581, whatever. Okay. Now, I had a bunch of guys that had a memo with a number, and their math had a different number. So, we had a $27 million memo, and I had $21 million in the calculations. Well, I guess that's and then I had one with $23 million bid, but $21 million in the calculation. So I didn't have a lot. I only had a couple of people where it was like, why would you bid something different than what your background has, what your support has, right? I mean, you should underwrite to your bid, Dustin.
Did I get that?
Explain it, Dustin. Explain
I
it.
was just looking at it, like, that sounds like mine.
Explain it.
When
you,
Yes, we have a question on the floor.
When you come up with the price and we're supposed to round because you don't want to give them,
Well,
where do you, is there do you round 20,000 up if that's gets you a number? Do you round down?
Well, the
How do
reality
you
is
come up with-
hopefully you've got enough of rapport with the broker that they can guide you to something that's gonna get you to the next round. So you may need to round up a little bit, you may need to round down a little bit.
Aren't
Always
you
round
supposed to
down.
do your best price up front?
Why would you do that?
No, there's always a second call, dude. You wanna have high enough to get to the next round, but you don't wanna blow all your gambling money on, first hour.
It's a bid.
Yeah, but it wasn't the final.
Don't worry, man. You made it to the next round.
There you go.
That's my number, it's the same number.
Mark has to go outside, call his
Hey, don't
account
say
and
it. Don't
everything.
say it. He had to call his
Oh, my
broker.
broker.
He went to go call his broker and come back.
Some of you included sensitivity tables. Some are done just in a haphazard fashion. It was just to put a sensitivity table in there. I put some in that analysis that I sent a memo or an example of with specific points that were realistic. So the interest rates were different layers. It was different points where realistically you could get that, cap rates at realistic intervals. It wasn't just, to put numbers, So, I had like cap rates, 7.11, the next point was 7.27, next one was I'm like, dude, why is there a sensitivity table like this, I mean, maybe you go from 6 in 25% intervals all the way, 25 basis points, and you could say, hey, that's a realistic range of where cap rates are today. What I could not figure out was everyone had a different cap rate even though they had the same number. I gave everybody the cash flow number. Some of you coincided on purchase prices. Even people who coincided on bid, purchase prices. Everybody had I had cap rates here anywhere from 5.4 to 8.0%. So what's cap rate? What's in place cap rate?
NOI divided by the cost.
NOI was what, 1521?
Yeah. or
So if somebody bids 22,500, what's the NOI, please? I mean, what's the cap rate?
6 point something.
6.7 something, 6.76.
Okay, so the in-place cap rate is 6.76%.
If that's the bid.
Yeah, so I got a couple bids here, 22.5. One says 8 cap, the other one says 6.7 cap, the other one says 6.75 cap. I got one that's almost there, 22.2, and it says 5.4 cap rate. So I don't know where people are calculating cap rates. Okay? Cap rate, NOI divided by property value. Pretty simple. Now,
On that example, they included the closing costs,
in what example?
the one that you sent.
Uh-huh. Okay. Included a closing cost to get to what?
To the cap rate.
To the purchase price.
The purchase price.
So, yeah, I mean, that's what it costs you to get there, right? At $22,500,000 a square, $22,500,000, how much is this building worth per square foot?
206, I think.
How many square feet are there in the building?
106,000.
6 and some change.
We went through this in the class once.
106,458.
Oh. Okay, so we're saying 206. I remember around 210, so that sounds about right to me, right? I had people that gave me there were 400,000 square feet, 170,000 square feet. I don't know where these numbers were coming from. So then the price per square foot was messed up. What sales comps did you identify as a class?
All class B. That's what I do.
What? Give me numbers. Give me buildings that sold.
1506-1508.
Borrow my copy, I'll tell you.
1,500 San Remo.
Is that a comparable building?
Yeah.
1500 San Remo is a comparable building?
That's Class A.
Is that the building that was just bought by Baptist?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
It was
That was in the CoStar report.
It's a lower class.
built in 1984, yeah. About 43.
What did that sell for?
43.
273 a foot.
And then it sold.
How much?
173 a foot.
173 a foot.
273.
273 a
5%
foot.
cap.
Okay.
Have to sell stuff. Yeah, but
Well, you can't, Baptist is buying that to move offices into, so they're not buying a cap rate there. They're paying so much a square foot for corporate facilities, okay? What else did you have?
815 Ponce. 815 Ponce.
Okay, what did that sell for?
$1,400,000.
So, is a building that sells for $1.4 million a realistic comp to a building that sells for $22 million?
no.
Throw it out.
They had 2990 Ponce de Leon.
What did that sell for?
It was built in 2012, but it sold for 199 a foot.
How big is the building?
Sold for 25 million. I didn't.
299 Ponce?
2990 Ponce de Leon.
Oh, that's the Regions Bank building. How much did that sell for?
199 a foot. 25.5. 25,500,000.
That's not that building, that might be the Del Monte Fresh building, 193? Okay,
One in Aventura on 29th Ave,
Aventura,
that far out, yeah.
is that a comp?
Got 396 Alhambra Circle,
Dude, that's not a comp. What did that sell for?
25.1 million.
Huh?
25.1 million, but it was basically $150 a square foot.
396?
396 Alhambra Circle, Coral Gables.
That didn't sell for $25 million.
That's what it says. Sell price 25.1.
6100 Caballero Boulevard.
That's right, somewhere right there.
Dude, that's in 2005.
Oh, okay, my bad. Hey, that's close enough to me. There wasn't a lot of sales over in that time.
That's the building that's there now. That got knocked down and there's a new building there.
Damn. Okay, hold on.
What about a building?
100
There weren't a lot of good comps. I mean,
Caballero
Hold
Boulevard.
on. There is,
There's one in the Gables Waterways, which is kind of like a Class B office building across from the University of Miami.
do you have 100 Miracle Mile?
That's retail.
I had one they bought that they
1600,
renovated.
6100 Caballero? No.
What is that? What is that Caballero one? What is it? Let me see it.
It's office space.
20 million? You sold it for 20 million?
Yeah, this one's sold for
But
20
where is
million.
it? Let me see a picture of it.
It's right here.
Oh yeah, I see it. It was built in 1952.
Yeah, that's the Waterways. That one works. How much is that per square foot?
243.
248.
248. That's the one I was looking for.
I have 243.05.
248.
Did you have 4565 Ponce?
Two what?
4565. 4565 Ponce de Leon Boulevard?
That's pretty far away. What do they have?
They have it at 264 a square foot.
That's a different, that's like way,
Too far?
yeah, that's on the other side of Bird Road. I wouldn't say that's a comp.
Okay.
So we got this one here. Okay. So we got three comps that seem to be relatively valid. And we're bidding how much? In the low 200s?
Mm-hmm.
Can we feel comfortable that we're not buying above market?
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. What's the cap rate for office buildings being traded in Dade County? I didn't see anybody talk to that. So if we just said that the cap rate was if we said that the cap rate was 6.76% at 22.5, so somewhere, most of us were in that general range, so is 6 3/4 the right cap rate to buy an office building?
That's what I
Class B
saw
office
for.
building?
That's what I saw for Coral Gables. It said it was around 6.7.
Where?
No,
Where'd you see that?
it was a CBRE report
Was that quoted anywhere?
on. I have the thing right here.
Did anybody go to Real Capital Analytics?
Try, but you gotta like, sign up for,
Yeah.
pay for that service.
You don't have to pay.
There we go.
You get academic access to that.
We'll cut right there.
I think CBRE quotes them though.
Yeah, CBE's Real Capital Analytics, they had a 6.6 for third quarter 2014.
Okay. Was this in your report?
Mhm.
It was? Okay. It was?
Yeah.
Let me see.
Well, I pointed it out specifically.
Where was it? Because I don't recall seeing that in anybody's. So, again, it doesn't matter. I'm not trying to call you out on it.
No, no.
Although I just did, but I'm not trying to call you out on it. This is good information. And that's good information, but I sent you to Real Capital Analytics. You can get an academic, access. You gotta ask for it. They'll give it to you. I'm a student, they'll give you access. But, so now I got CBRE, which was free, quoting Real Capital Analytics, telling me that's the right cap rate for office in Dade County. So now I'm feeling good here. Now I'm feeling good here. What were the rents in the,
I didn't point it out.
What were the rents in the Argus model? What were the market rents? What was the market rent?
$26.
26 bucks? What was in place?
That was what was in place.
Okay, what was in the model going forward as market rents?
$33.95, I think it was.
Does anybody else validate that? I didn't see any dialogue regarding that anywhere, for the most part. Yeah, I can tell you, I remember every section of every paper, but generally, I'm looking at things that would be of interest to me. Because the analysis that I would like to see is, what's in place, what am I modeling,
What's market?
and what's market? Alyssa, you were closest with all the Jones Lang LaSalle information. What's market for Class B in Coral Gables?
The rents,
Yep.
30,
I found 37.17.
35.
Asking.
That's what Class A is.
That's class.
Yeah, that's, listen, if you tell, I'm sorry?
30.85 for Class B and Coral.
Okay, asking, and I'll take 10% off that, so like 28 bucks.
That's what CBRE quoted in general, 28.
So I can kind of feel, you know, I've got a little bit of upside, but I'm definitely not above market, okay? So I'm feeling a little bit better there. I think I'm feeling a little bit better there. What other things? Op expenses. What are the op expenses here? I saw everything from $7 a square foot to $14 a square foot. What were op expenses? What should op expenses be? Did anybody go to BOMA and see what office expenses should be in a suburban office building or a CBD office building in Coral Gables? I mean, by the way,
I found,
in every one of our classes, we did all this stuff. In every one of our sessions, we went and got market data for market rents. We did different markets, we did different asset classes. We looked for sales comp and cap rate information for different asset classes, for different markets, okay? We looked at operating expenses and figured out what they should be or what they could be, right? So none of this stuff, this was just all reinforcement of things we've worked on during the sessions, right? What should, and just off the top of your head, what should op expenses be in an office, downtown office building, CBD office building?
14 bucks.
13,
11 or 12.
14.
Probably 13 to 15 bucks. 15 bucks is probably a closer number. So if you got 7, there's something wrong with your formula.
At
You're
14,
probably the guys
26.
that have 188,000 square feet or $400,000 a square feet. Okay? But the real question of that, demonstrating that is, can I run it any more efficiently? Are those market? Am I going to be penalized operating that building because of tenants? That's going to put me out of the market. Okay? Okay. Not one person here gave me, okay, so let's go back. When we're buying a real estate asset, what should be, or what are the 2 most commonly used metrics, financial metrics that we use in this country as a determinant of return? What do we look at?
Interest rate. Interest rate.
When we look at a building, when we underwrite a building, what are the 2 questions people always ask?
IR.
Okay, what's the IRR on this?
The cash on cash.
Well, I don't particularly like that. I'm going to say cap rate. Okay? Because cash on cash implies what?
That you're paying with cash.
No.
That's just what your first year return.
Well, there's an implication of leverage in there. And so cap rate is looking at the asset performance, okay? So if you go cash on cash,
Okay.
we can both have the same cap rate, but different cash on cash returns because of your ability to borrow. And so what's gonna happen is, this is a universal number that I can compare to. Okay? In certain asset classes, we use different numbers. At times they'll use multipliers. Like in multifamily, they'll do some sort of rent multiplier. But these are these are the numbers, right? So, when I take a look at this, we can calculate this. We know what the cash flow is today. We know what we're gonna bid. The question you asked before is, what's cap rate when I go out? And ultimately, that's gonna have an implication on what? Now, IRR takes a look at not only what I'm paying for the asset today, right? But what's the impact on my annual cash flows, positive or negative, along the way? And what's the potential of some terminal value somewhere down the line? So, what's my value today? What's my return over the entire life of the asset? What I thought curious after all the discussions we've had in this class and in other classes, how many of you were able to justify buying and getting these great returns because we did this wonderful thing. I'm going to buy at 6 and I'm going to sell at 5. And the thing I'd question or caution you on is buying real estate purely on speculation. Now, there may be underlying reasons why you may be able to do this, okay? That's less likely. You as an individual operator don't really have that much control over cap rates. You do have control over cash flow to some extent. So, to the extent that you can impact market rents and all that, it's okay for a significant component of your overall gain to come from your terminal value and not from your current cash flow. What it's not okay is that terminal value is because you've compressed cap rates. Now, the converse of that, or the inverse of that, is some people got really lousy returns because they said, okay, well, when they get out of this thing, it's going to be at 8%. Well, that may be the reality in a 5-year period, I don't know. And that's the problem that one runs into when they underwrite, because, you know, what's my personal experience? Most people will underwrite at or no more than 1 point above where the going in cap rate is. Is that realistic? Maybe not. Is it at least going to put you in line with what other people are bidding in the marketplace? Yes. Okay? And so, I don't want to minimize that there is a significant component here. Now, what I didn't see anybody do was take a look at that IRR component and say how much of that IRR is comprised of current income and how much of that is comprised of terminal value. And I don't know if in the investment or finance classes you've taken in the program so far you've done that, but I know when I taught the investments class we did that. Because it's important to know, you see, the sort of validation of this is if you're buying a core asset, the bulk of your IRR should be coming in the way of current income. And if you're in value or opportunity funds, that terminal value is going to become a bigger component of that IRR. But there's also the reality check of, hey, I'm buying this, but I'm not really going to make anything until I sell it. It's kind of like the boat. Don't really get any money back till you sell it, other than you keep putting money into it. So, these are the two most important things, but don't lose sight of the fact that this is a critical component, that cap rate in versus out analysis, and what component of my IRR is comprised of current income, and how much of that comes from capital appreciation. I still had certain spreadsheets that had hard-coded numbers, calculations inside the spreadsheet. I'm not gonna get into that. I said this wasn't a quantitative class, but for those of you who